Yeah, what can I do for you?
Time's up.
During a class at MIT, a math professor named Lambeau tells his students that he has just put up a difficult math problem on the blackboard in the hallway, with the hope that one of them might be able to solve it by the end of the semester. He adds that anyone who is able to solve it will have their accomplishment recorded and published in the university's prestigious magazine. Later that day, a young janitor named Will sees the problem on the board and looks intrigued by it. However, he just continues his job and eventually leaves to hang out with his friend, Chucky. While they're at a bar, Will can't stop thinking about the math problem he saw earlier, and he tells Chucky that he's heading home. When Will gets there, he goes to the bathroom and tries to solve the problem on the mirror. After a few attempts, Will seems sure of his answer and cleans up his mirror. The next day, Will takes a few minutes to solve the question on the board, while making sure no one sees him. Shortly after, a few students see the solution and head over to meet Lambeau at a MIT alumni reunion party. As the students mention that they're from Lambeau's class, he says he can't attend to them because it's a Saturday. However, one of the students says they all couldn't wait till Monday to find out who proved the theory on the board. Lambeau looks shocked by this, and he heads into the building to see what the students are talking about. When Lambeau sees the solution, he looks impressed and asks his top two students if they were the ones who proved the theory. The two students look just as impressed as Lambeau, and they inform the professor that they had nothing to do with it. This leaves Lambeau shocked, and he starts wondering who could have solved it.
I'm gonna take off.
Elsewhere, Will and Chucky hang out with their friends, Morgan and Billy, at a Little League baseball game. On their way home, they seem to have a problem with a group of boys roaming the area, and they quickly get out of the car to confront them. This results in a serious fight, and as Will punches one of the boys repeatedly, the cops arrive and arrest him. Days later, when Lambeau gets to his class, he notices that more students are around. Lambeau finds this interesting and says he's sure all the new students came to find out who solved the problem on the board. As everyone anticipates someone stepping forward to claim Lambeau's prize, no one does this, and the professor looks confused.
Stop rushing me back!
He then mentions that after speaking to his colleagues, he has written another problem on the board that took them 2 years to prove. Elsewhere, Will leaves the municipal court and gets picked up by Chucky, who asks when his friend's arraignment will be. Will says it's next week, and he eventually enters the car so they can leave. Shortly after, Will resumes his job at MIT, and when he sees the new problem, he starts solving it again. While he's at it, Lambeau and his assistant, Tom, leave the classroom and see him there. Lambeau doesn't like this, and he says that Will shouldn't be messing with people's work. Will apologizes, but as Lambeau keeps scolding him, he just walks away angrily. Just then, Lambeau walks back toward the board and notices that Will has just solved the problem. This leaves him shocked, and he realizes that Will is the mystery math genius who solved the first problem.
Kathy!
What?
Later that night, Will follows his friends to a bar where Harvard students hang out. While Will, Morgan, and Billy take their seats, Chucky sees a girl named Skylar and tells his friends that he's going to talk to her. Chucky then interrupts Skylar while she's talking to a friend, and he says he recently had a history class with her. Skylar seems quite cool, and even though she can tell that Chucky is lying, she just continues listening to him. Almost immediately, another Harvard student named Clark confronts Chucky for lying, and he also tries to sound intelligent to impress Skylar and her friend. Skylar knows who he is, and she tells him to back off, but he just continues trying to expose Chucky for lying. Will seems pissed by this, and he confronts Clark for quoting textbooks to sound smart. As Clark starts quoting another book, Will finishes the sentence and says he has read it before. He then implies that Clark is just wasting his money by going to Harvard instead of reading books in the public library.
Yeah, okay.
Clark says he'd still end up with a degree, but Will believes it won't be useful if he can't think for himself. Clark looks quite disappointed, and he decides to stop arguing with Will. As Will walks away, his friends look proud, and Skylar also seems impressed with how smart he is. Shortly after, while Skylar is leaving the bar, she stops at Will's table and jokes that she was waiting for him to come and talk to her. Will then introduces himself, and she also tells him her name. After this, she gives him her number her and says he can call her if he'd like to go out to get coffee with her. Will already seems attracted to her, and as she leaves, his friends look impressed by how he got her number. The next day, Lambeau and Tom head to the maintenance department, where Will works at the university. As Lambeau asks about Will, the head of the department mentions that he won't reveal anything about one of his workers unless there's a complaint.
Yeah, what can I do for you?
Lambeau says it's important, and the head of the department informs him that Will didn't show up for work today. He adds that Will got the job through his parole officer, and if Lambeau wants more information, he'd have to call the person. Days later, Lambeau attends a court session where Will defends himself to have his charges dropped. Despite quoting several books and old cases, the judge says he can't just let Will go because he has a history of violence. He adds that he just checked Will's file and found out that he has been through several foster homes, and he even had to be taken away from 3 due to physical abuse. Will doesn't have anything to say, and the judge refuses to drop the charges. Later that day, while Will is in jail, he calls Skylar and asks if she would like to go out with him. Skylar looks surprised, but after she agrees to have coffee with him, Will asks if she's a law student. Skylar says she's not, and Will ends the call.
Thank you.
Shortly after, he's taken to the interrogation room, where he meets Lambeau. Will asks what Lambeau wants, and the professor introduces himself. He adds that he just spoke to the judge, who is now willing to drop the charges under 2 conditions. Will asks what they are, and Lambeau says one of the conditions is that they have to meet every week to solve more complex maths. He adds that the judge also wants Will to see a therapist. Will finds this funny, but Lambeau says he'd have to submit the report of the meetings to the judge. He also mentions that if Will fails to meet any of the conditions, he'll have to serve time. Even though Will still doesn't like the idea of seeing a therapist, he agrees to do it. Following this, Will gets released, and he starts working with Lambeau on different math problems.
Yeah, sure, where are you?
Days later, Lambeau tries to get some of his colleagues to serve as Will's therapist. However, Will frustrates the men and insists that he doesn't need a therapist. Lambeau looks worried that the judge will send Will back to jail, and as Tom asks what they'll do, the professor says he knows someone who might be able to help. He adds that the person was his old roommate in college. The next day, Lambeau heads to Bunker Hill Community College to meet his friend, Sean, who works there as a psychology professor. When Sean sees Lambeau, he looks shocked and introduces his old roommate to his students as a great math professor. Shortly after, they head to a bar to talk, and Lambeau asks why Sean didn't come to the recent MIT reunion. Sean says he's been busy, and Lambeau points out that they haven't talked much since Sean's wife, Nancy, died. Just then, Lambeau brings up Will's case and says that he wants Sean to be Will's therapist. Sean doesn't seem interested in this, but Lambeau says he just wants someone who can get through to Will. Sean looks confused, but Lambeau says he's the perfect person because he's from the same place as Will. Sean starts considering it, and Lambeau mentions that Will is a math genius who needs help. Sean then agrees to meet Will, and Lambeau looks pleased.
Wow.
The next day, Will arrives late to Sean's office, but Sean doesn't have a problem with this. He then tells Lambeau and Tom to leave the room so he can talk to Will alone. After Lambeau and Tom leave, Sean tries to ask Will a few questions, but he doesn't respond to them. Instead, he seems more interested in talking about how Sean wastes his money buying irrelevant books. Sean thinks they're relevant, but Will keeps walking around the room. He then sees a painting and criticizes it, but Sean doesn't really complain about it. Will eventually mentions that he thinks Sean is frustrated about something. Sean just ignores him, but Will asks if he married the wrong woman. Sean tells Will to watch his mouth, but this only makes him realize that the psychology professor doesn't want to talk about his wife. Since Will's goal is to frustrate Sean, he repeats that Sean married the wrong woman. This gets Sean pissed, and he angrily grabs Will by the neck and warns him never to talk about his wife.
Yeah, I know. It really gets in the way of my yoga.
After this, Will leaves the office, and as Lambeau comes in, Sean tells his old roommate to make sure Will arrives early for their weekly sessions on Thursdays. Lambeau looks pleased with this, and he leaves the office to speak to Will. The next day, Will goes on a date with Skylar and learns that she's a rich kid with a huge inheritance. She also tells him that she'll soon be moving to California for medical school. Skylar seems quite friendly and funny, and Will likes this. Days later, Will heads to Sean's office for their first session. However, when he gets there, Sean says they're going out. Shortly after, Sean gets Will to sit on a bench outside, but he doesn't understand this. Sean then says that after thinking about everything Will said the last time they met, he just realized that Will is still a kid.
Well, you look lovely in those glasses.
He adds that even though Will has read many books, there are certain things he has never experienced. Sean says Will doesn't know what it's like to fight in a war and lose his friend on the battlefield. He also mentions that Will has never looked at someone and felt vulnerable. Will just continues listening attentively, and Sean talks about how he loved his wife through several difficulties, including cancer. He adds that Will doesn't know about real loss because he has never loved something or someone more than himself. Sean says he can't just pick up a book and judge Will based on a character in it, and that he'll only be able to help if Will is ready to open up and talk about himself. The next day, Will heads to work with Chucky at a construction site. After they're done for the day, Will calls Skylar but doesn't say anything before hanging up.
No, and I forgot the number.
Days later, Will meets up with Sean for their session, but he just stares at the clock and counts down the seconds until the time is up. After Will leaves, Sean tells Lambeau that they didn't say anything during the session. Lambeau doesn't understand this, but Sean says he needs Will to talk first. The following week, they meet up again, and as Sean starts dozing off, Will decides to break the ice by telling a joke. Sean finds it funny, and Will says he recently went on a date. Sean looks happy for Will and asks how it went. Will says it was good, and Sean asks if he has called the girl. Will says he hasn't because he really thinks Skylar is smart and perfect, and he doesn't want to ruin that. Sean finds this funny, and he says that Will might be the one who doesn't want Skylar to think he's not perfect. He then talks about his late wife's funny imperfections, which are among the things he loved. He adds that Will doesn't have to be bothered about Skylar's imperfections because she might be perfect for him. He also mentions that Will has to stop trying to be defensive because he'll never really get to know anyone.
Time's up.
Shortly after, Will heads to Skylar's dorm, and she looks surprised to see him. She says she thought he would call her, but Will mentions that he has been busy. He then asks if she would like to go out with him, but she says she's currently trying to study a chemical formula. She adds that they can meet up tomorrow, and Will says it's fine. After he leaves, he writes the formula in a simpler way and goes back to give it to Skylar. He says he couldn't wait till tomorrow, and that he wants them to go out again. After this, Skylar agrees, and they head out to watch a horse race. During the race, Skylar asks Will about his background, and he tells her that he grew up in the area. He also lies about having 12 brothers, and Skylar says she hopes to meet them one day. The following week, Will meets up with Sean again for their regular session. He then asks if Sean ever thinks about what would happen if he hadn't met his wife. Sean says that despite all the pain he now feels about his wife's death, he has no regrets.
You kidding me?
Will asks when Sean knew his wife was the one for him, and he says it was the first time he saw her. He adds that it was also on the day the Red Sox played the biggest game in their history. Will looks amazed, and Sean narrates how he and his friends got tickets to watch the game live. However, he mentions that despite how amazing that night was for the Red Sox, he didn't go to the stadium. Will looks shocked, and Sean says he had already met Nancy and didn't want to miss the chance to talk to her. Will cannot believe this, and he asks if Sean's friends just let him stay with Nancy in a bar outside the stadium. Sean says they had no choice, and that he slipped them a note saying he was going to see about a girl. Will still finds this hard to believe, but Sean says he doesn't have regrets about being with Nancy. Days later, as their relationship grows stronger, Skylar asks to see Will's friends, and he takes her to a bar to meet them.
You ever hear of Gerald Lambeau?
Skylar enjoys the evening with the boys, and after a while they leave the bar together. Skylar then tells Will that she wants to see where he lives and meet his brothers. Will says they'll do that another time, but Chucky jokes that he doesn't want to take Skylar there because he's scared she'd dump him when she sees the place. Will just laughs this off and leaves the scene with Skylar. Days later, Lambeau meets Sean at a bar to talk about Will. Sean says they're making progress, and Lambeau asks if they've talked about the future. Sean says they're still unpacking Will's past, but Lambeau suggests speeding things up to focus on the future because he already has a lot of job offers lined up for Will at places where he'd be able to do impressive work related to maths. Sean says he doesn't think Will is ready, but Lambeau doesn't get this. Sean believes they need to give Will some time to figure out what he wants, but Lambeau says he doesn't have bad plans for the kid. He adds that Will has a gift, and they need to give him direction because he can become someone great in the future. Sean still insists that Will might not want what Lambeau wants, and they have to give him more time to decide instead of manipulating him.
Do you know all their names?
Lambeau says doing that didn't work out for Sean, and this causes a brief argument between them. Lambeau then says he's sorry for coming, and that he only wanted to give Sean an update on Will. He adds that Will is currently at an interview he arranged for him. Interestingly, it turns out that Will isn't at the interview, and he has sent Chucky to represent him. Meanwhile, Will is hanging out with Skylar, who is trying to read for a test. Will offers to help her, but she says she has to study alone because it's really important. She adds that Will needs to understand that not everyone can assimilate things like him. Days later, Skylar tells Will that she'll soon be moving to California and she wants him to come with her. Will looks confused and asks if she's sure, and she says she is. However, Will says he doesn't want to go because there's a possibility that she might dislike him if she finds out some things about him. Skylar says she doesn't care, but Will mentions that he does. He adds that he can't move to California and end up being with someone who might eventually figure out that she doesn't like him.
So why don't we just hang out here all day?
Skylar says she won't do that, and she tells him to consider moving with her instead of staying in a place where no one challenges him. Will thinks she's insulting his background, and he sounds quite pissed. He says he can't move with Skylar because he knows she's rich, and she'll probably marry someone with a similar background. Skylar doesn't understand why he's so focused on her background, and she tells him that she lost her parents at a young age. She adds that she also inherited their money quite early, and there's not a day she doesn't think about giving it back if it means she'll see her parents again. As she says he's the one who is afraid that she might not love him back, Will denies this. Skylar then tells Will that if he says he doesn't love her, she'll stop disturbing him. Will says he doesn't, and as he leaves her room, she breaks down in tears. The next day, while Will is waiting in Lambeau's office, Tom tells Will to appreciate what the professor is doing for him because not many people will do that for anyone. Shortly after, Lambeau comes into the office to take a look at the equations Will just wrote down for him. While he's at it, he asks Will about the interview. Will says he didn't go because he had a date, and Lambeau looks shocked. He says it's not a good look for him if Will doesn't show up at the interviews. Will says he doesn't want the interviews, and Lambeau agrees to cancel them. As Will says he doesn't want to spend the rest of his life teaching people like Lambeau, the professor looks disappointed and says he deserves some appreciation. Will doesn't care about this, and he says that solving maths is quite easy for him. He says it's not his fault that Lambeau can't solve math problems like him, as he also sets the equations he just submitted on fire. Lambeau says he sometimes wishes he had never met Will because he'd be able to sleep at night, not knowing there's a talent about to go to waste.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Days later, Lambeau gets Will an interview at the NSA. During the interview, Will is asked why he wouldn't want to work for the NSA, and he says he doesn't want to be responsible for the death of innocent people. Later that day, during a meeting with Sean, Will talks about his answer to the interview question. Sean then asks if Will has a soulmate. Will jokes that his soulmates are popular people like Shakespeare and the Pope, but Sean says he needs to be serious. He adds that Will won't have a soulmate in a world where he's scared of taking the first step because he can't stop thinking about the negative things that could happen in the future. Will says he didn't want the job, but Sean says it's not about that. He then asks what Will is passionate about or what he really wants to do in life. Will jokes that he wants to be a shepherd, and Sean tells him to leave if he can't be serious. Will says he thought they were friends, but Sean insists that Will has to know what he wants.
Because I don't see a lot of honor in that, Will.
Days later, Will calls Skylar to inform her that he has been getting some job interviews. He says he won't always be a construction worker, but Skylar mentions that she never cared about that. She also says she loves him, but he just ends the call. A while later, Skylar heads to the airport and leaves for California. The next day, Will doesn't show up at Sean's office for their regular session. When Lambeau gets there, he also doesn't meet Sean in the office, and he looks disappointed because he doesn't want Will to go back to jail. Meanwhile, Will is at the construction site, and Chucky asks about Skylar. He says she has left for California, and Chucky looks shocked. Chucky also asks when Will's meetings with Sean will end, and he says it's just a week after he turns 21. Chucky asks if they'll get Will a job, but he says he's not interested in what they're offering. He adds that he'll stay back in town with Chucky and his friends, and when they're old, their kids will also be friends.
Well, I never really cared about that.
Chucky doesn't like this, and he says that if Will is still in the neighborhood in 20 years, he'll kill him. Will looks confused, but Chucky tells him not to let his gift go to waste. He also mentions that it will be an insult to him, Morgan, and Billy if Will doesn't fulfill his potential by leaving the town and getting a better job. As he says that hanging around in the town is a waste of time, Will says it's not. Chucky insists that it is, and he mentions that the best part of his day is the 10 seconds before he knocks on Will's door every morning. He says he's always looking forward to a day when he'll knock, and Will won't be there because he has left town without saying goodbye. The next day, Lambeau goes to Sean's office and complains about how the therapy sessions with Will have turned out. Sean says he can't let Lambeau push Will to make a decision that he doesn't want to make. He adds that Will has a lot of problems, and one of the reasons why he doesn't trust anyone is because his parents were the first ones to abandon him. Lambeau doesn't believe this has anything to do with Will's future, and he says that Sean has to stop being mad at him for being more successful. Sean finds this funny and says he's never been mad at Lambeau for that. He says Lambeau's arrogance is the reason he doesn't come to the reunions, because Lambeau can't help but feel embarrassed by him, even though he's now doing what he loves.
What? I thought we were friends. What do you mean you did?
Lambeau says he won't let Sean teach Will that it's okay to quit or be a failure. As they continue arguing about this, Will comes into the office and Lambeau leaves. Sean then apologizes for whatever Will might have heard. He adds that he has just received Will's file because he's about to write a report about their sessions to tell the judge whether he passed or failed. Will asks if Sean will fail him, but the professor just looks at the file and sees the photos of injuries Will sustained as a kid. Sean then talks about how he always provoked his drunk dad to beat him up so that his mom and younger sibling would be safe. Will also tells Sean about how his foster dad used to beat him. After this, Sean says that everything in Will's file is not his fault. This makes Will emotional, and he hugs Sean. Days later, Will thinks about his future and decides to accept one of the job offers Lambeau got for him. Later that day, he meets up with Sean, who congratulates him on the new job. Since their sessions have now ended, Will thanks Sean for everything. He then asks if they can still keep in touch, and Sean says they can. He adds that he'll be traveling a bit around the world, but that Will can still call his new number. After this, he wishes Will good luck and tells him to do what's in his heart. Much later, Will's friends surprise him with a car for his birthday so that he'd be able to drive it to his new workplace.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Elsewhere, Lambeau sees Sean clearing out his office. He then says sorry for their misunderstandings, and Sean does too. Before Sean moves his things out of the office, Lambeau suggests going to get a drink, and he accepts the offer. The next day, Will drives his new car to Sean's house and leaves a note in Sean's mailbox. Coincidentally, Chucky and the other boys have just arrived at Will's house. As Chucky knocks on the door a few times, no one answers it, and this makes him smile because because it's a sign that Will has decided to leave town. Meanwhile, Sean sees Will driving away from his house, and he heads downstairs immediately. When he gets there, he sees the note in his mailbox, asking Sean to tell Lambeau that he's sorry about ditching the job. Sean also opens the next page and sees another message from Will, saying he's going to see about a girl. Sean finds this funny, and he jokes that Will stole his line. Elsewhere, Will heads out of town and begins his journey to California to reunite with Skylar. After Lambeau discovers that a young janitor at MIT is a math genius, he hires Sean as a therapist to help Will overcome his rough past. Even though things don't go well at first, Will eventually trusts Sean and opens up about his struggles. Sean then gradually helps Will understand that he has to trust people and stop being defensive or negative all the time. With this, he abandons Lambeau's offers and decides to head to California to start a new life with Skylar. In this story, we learn that facing our past is the first step toward building a better future.